Genesis chapter 14. So the time really, it really starts picking up now. You know, I know that chapter-wise, we just got off the ark a little bit ago. You know, there was just in the teens of people, but now we're a few generations past getting off the ark, and time in the Bible is kind of starting to pick up a little bit. But you still have, even now in Genesis chapter 14, as it talks about nations, I mean, you're not talking about nations like you know, millions and millions of people. You're probably just talking about, you know, maybe 100,000, you know, or something like that for a nation, hundreds of thousands. I mean, yes, there's a lot of people, but remember, these are very nomadic kind of people and have been up to this point. Although they have kind of settled, even Abram's kind of settled. But anyhow, and I don't even know why I wanted to bring this up, but just, it's not humongous nations like we think of when we think of a nation. But anyhow, let me just go ahead and read the first 4 verses. It says, it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemember, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these joined together in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea, and 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. I should have asked for somebody to read those.
You said if you say them real fast.
Yeah, you just got to act like you know what you're doing. You just... You want to read those for us? But anyhow, so what we have here is you have this little, without going through it all, you have this little 4-nation alliance or federation, and they have apparently come down into the valley there, or into Canaan, in the plain of Shinar, where Sodom and Gomorrah and all that exists. And they have apparently been collecting tribute from them, it says, for about 12 years. So verse 4 says that for 12 years they served Chedorlaomer. He appears to be the leader of this little 4-nation federation. And so in the 13th year, they decided that they're not going to pay him anymore. They decided, am I getting ahead of myself? No, yeah. In the 13th year, they rebelled at the end of verse 4. So in the 13th year, they decided they were through paying tribute to this federation, and so they decided they were going to buck him for whatever that's going to be. So this Valley of Siddim, though, in verse 3, where it says that is the Salt Sea, you know, probably the Dead Sea. It's probably the Dead Sea. It was probably called the Salt Sea way back there. So, because we know the Dead Sea is salty, and that's why it's dead. Well, it's dead because it doesn't have an outlet, is why it's dead. But everything, anyhow, it just collects all the minerals, and all the minerals won't let anything grow. Anyhow, so 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and then the 13th year they rebelled. So then, verse 5, in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, they came and attacked the Rephaim in the Ashtaroth, Karnaim, the Zuzim, and Ham, and the Emim, and in Shavah Kiriathaim. And the Horites in their mountains of Seir, as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. So, in the 15th year, this little federation comes in, and they're just kind of going to do a little scorched earth thing here. They're just going to wipe out everybody. They're just going to kill everyone. And this really is going somewhere, but I'm just taking us up to that place. So, and the king of Sodom, verse 8. So, the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the king of Admah and the king of Zebulun and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, they went out and they joined together in battle in the valley of Siddim. So this other little federation of Sodom, Gomorrah, Zoar, and Zebulun, they got together and they went out to fight against, verse 9, against Chedorlaomer, king of England, Tidal, king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, the 4 kings against 5. So now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some fell there, and the remainder fled to the mountains. So I don't really know the significance of why he wanted to make sure we understood that it had these pits, but it had some kind of asphalt pits. But anyhow, what happened is that according to this, verse 10, they either died out there or they ran and hid in the mountains. So Chedorlaomer is leading this federation, and again, it's just kind of one of the, we would call it a scorched earth. They're just wiping out everyone as they go through it. So then in verse 11, they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions, and they went their way. They also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. So since, all of the warriors from Sodom and Gomorrah had gone out, and they either died down there in the valley or they ran and hid in the mountains. So these kings just went through Sodom and Gomorrah, and they just took everything. They just took everything they could get their hands on. They took everything they wanted, which means that they also took the people. They also took captives. So they just sacked the city. And one of the captives that they happened to take was Lot. If you remember last week, Lot had... Well, it said he pitched his tent toward Sodom. He got near Sodom. By this time now, he's living in Sodom. So he's one of the ones that are captured. So verse 13. So then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, the Amorite, the brother of Eshcol, the brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. Now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house and went in pursuit as far as Dan. He divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. He brought back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. So the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Sheba, that is the king's valley, after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him. So someone had escaped, and they ran back, and they told Abram, look, Sodom has been overrun, captives have been taken, your nephew Lot is gone with him. Now I know in here he calls him his brother, but it's his nephew. We'd already established that from when they were called out. It's his brother's son. From when, back when God called Abram to leave, said he took his brother's son with him. So, I guess saying a brother is just a way of showing that he was close kin, but it was his nephew. So Abram is apparently pretty wealthy now. We talked about how the fact that he had gotten wealthy when he had gone down into Egypt. When Pharaoh was giving him all that stuff because he thought Sarah was his sister, and I guess he was just trying to bless Abram. And so Abram apparently even now has 318 trained servants. He's got his own little army. He is kind of like a little king in his own right. He is certainly a clan leader. He certainly he has a little army. He's got some power. He's got some stuff. I mean, he's a leader in his own right, of at least of a clan. So he gets 318 people, and he takes off after Chedorlaomer and the Federation, and he does. His victory comes by one, he attacks at night, and the other is he divides his forces up, and so he attacks them from a bunch of different sides. So I guess if you ever have a small army and you're going to go against somebody, divide them up, attack from a bunch of different sides, and attack at night. That seems to be the method that worked for Abram. And he rescued everyone. He chased, of course, the forces were surprised that they were being attacked, and so they took off, and says that he chased them as far as a place that's north of Damascus, and he brought back everything. He brought back all the people. He brought back Lot. He brought back all the stuff that they had taken out of Sodom, and he brought back all the captives out of Sodom. So then the king of Sodom shows up, I guess once he heard that Chedorlaomer had been defeated, he decided he would come down and he meets with Abram. Another thing that I wanted to point out here, it's really not, I just wanted to point it out. Verse 13, this is the first time that the word Hebrew is used. This is the first time that they're called Hebrews. This is the first time Abram is called a Hebrew. So the word literally, as I tried to look it up and run it down a little bit, it literally means passes over, or one who passes over, or one who traverses, is kind of literally what it means. And it really makes sense, kind of, since Abram was a nomad for the most part. He was kind of a wanderer. I know he had settled there at the terebinth trees there at Mamre, but you remember he had to walk the whole land. God told him, walk it all, and everywhere you walk, that's what I'm going to give you. So he was kind of nomadic. He was one that was just traversing the land. And so it just kind of makes sense. There is actually some geological evidence that this word was used way back, which would have been around Abram's time, which is, way back there historically, and that it was used for like nomadic people. So it's probably referring to Abram's clan. Don't really know where it came from. Most of the people think it comes from the guy Eber, E-B-E-R, who is a descendant of Shem. And so we know that they are the Shemites. They are from the descendants of Shem. We know, and most people think it's sort of a play off of that guy's name. But that would have been, Abram is many generations later than Eber. But anyhow, I just wanted to point it out because it's the first time that Abram is called a Hebrew. So it would be the first time that his people would be called Hebrews. But Genesis is the book of firsts. Everything that happens in Genesis is a first. So really what happens here is I read to verse 17 where the king of Sodom comes out. And really 17 should go right into 21. But there's this little thing that happens in 18, 19, and 20 that's almost, I don't know, it's just kind of, it's not weird, but it's just very different. And again, you're going to see that it's just stuck in there. And then in verse 21, verse 21 really should follow. I'm not saying it should follow verse 17. I'm saying if you were trying to read it it would only make sense for it to do that. But what happens is in verses 18 through 20, there's this guy named Melchizedek who comes on the scene. So verse 18, then Melchizedek, the king of Salem, he brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. And he blessed Abram. And he said, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tithe of all. And so I believe that's referring to Abraham. Abram gave Melchizedek a tithe of everything. So we get this. It's kind of an amazing little story, account of this guy who comes out. And I'm really going to, we're going to read some New Testament passages because the New Testament passages really shape what I think is happening here. But first I just want to say that it says that he brings out bread and wine. One of two things. Either he's bringing food to the army because they've just come off the battle and they're hungry and thirsty. And so he's bringing bread and wine. Or, what do you associate bread and wine with? Communion. And, it could be, it could have spiritual significance. The fact, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say either way. It just says that he brings bread and wine. And so it's just kind of what we believe about him. Now I'm going to go ahead and, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what I believe about Melchizedek, and then we're going to read the passages. And actually, I was surprised that most of the scholars think he was like just a real person, and that he was a king of this place called Salem, and actually it could have been Jerusalem. Some people say Jerusalem with the Salem, but it was just Salem at that time, there in the land of Canaan. But he would have been a righteous man. Obviously, he would have been a holy priest. But there are some things that are said about him in the New Testament that make me think that, there are times in the Bible, in the Old Testament, where you get this, an incarnation of Christ. I'm going to say of Christ, where God shows up in the form of someone or something. We're going to see a little bit later, in Genesis, in just a few chapters, where there are going to be some angels that are going to show up in the form of men, and they're going to talk to Abram. They're going to talk to him about how they're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So there are times when spiritual beings show up, and there are times in the Old Testament where it's pretty obvious that it's Christ or that it's God himself showing up. I believe that this is one of those times with Melchizedek. So let's just read a few passages. Hebrews, actually they're all in Hebrews. So we can start in Hebrews. I'll just read them in order. So if you want to find Hebrews, or if you want to just listen, that's fine. Hebrews chapter 5 is where they start. So Hebrews is a New Testament, but it is deeply, deeply rooted in Old Testament law and in the Jewish traditions and laws. And so you really have to have an understanding of the Old Testament to make the connection. But anyhow, a lot of it is about Christ being the more perfect and the most perfect high priest. And not just a high priest, but Christ was also king, a king and a priest. And so Hebrews chapter 5, verse 6, and then I'm going to skip and read verse 10. It says, he also says in another place, and he's talking about Christ. Well, let me start in verse 5 so you'll catch it. He said, so also Christ did not glorify himself to become high priest, but it was he who said to him, it was God who said to Christ, both of those are capital H's, capital he, and said to him, you are my son, today I've begotten you. And he also says in another place, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. And I believe that might be in the Psalm somewhere. So then skip down to verse 10. He says, called by God as high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. So what I'm trying to point out here is he's saying that Christ, Jesus, was a high priest. And he's using the word order. You understand, like if I said an order of monks, it's kind of a, lineage isn't the word, but it's kind of a certain group of monks. He's saying here that he's from the order of priests that Melchizedek was from. So in other words, he's a priest from the same order, from the same sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Somebody help me.
It is the same rank.
Yeah, not really rank, but it's more of, yeah, it's a certain specific, anyhow.
Well, like the Levites were the priesthood.
Right. So, so Aaron was the high priest, but what he's saying here is that Melchizedek was even higher than Aaron. He was from a different order. The Levitical priesthood came from Aaron, but Melchizedek and Jesus come from an order that's greater than even what Aaron was. It's more of a spiritual order, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But he's saying that Christ and Melchizedek are from this same order. Chapter 6, verse 20. It's hard to just read one verse, but I'm going to do it. He says, where the forerunner has entered for us, he's talking about Christ going into the Holy of Holies. Even Jesus, again, having become a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So then in chapter 7, now chapter 7 is where I really get a lot of my stuff about Melchizedek from. So let's just start in verse 1 and kind of unpack it. He says, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham, returning from the slaughter of the kings, and he blessed him. So first of all, let's do two things here. So Jesus was a priest and a king. He was a priest and king. You know, you had David who was king, but David wasn't a priest. You had Aaron who was priest, but he wasn't a king. But Jesus is both king and priest. Well, so was Melchizedek, according to verse 1. He was a king of Salem, it says, and priest of the Most High God. So this is that separate order. He fulfills both of these duties and both of these functions. So king of Salem, Salem is the word shalom, so it would be peace, king of peace. But he's also the king of righteousness. Verse 2 says, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all, first being translated king of righteousness, and then also king of Salem, meaning king of peace. So he was the king of righteousness, and he was also the king of peace. Well, obviously, you don't have to do much of a stretch to apply those to Christ either, really, right? To be the king of peace, peace with God. To be the king of righteousness, our righteousness is found only in Christ. So, and what I'm trying to show you here is that Melchizedek, and where we're really fixing to go to in verse 3, is Melchizedek is more like Jesus than he is a person. And I don't think he's a person. I think he is Jesus. Or if not Jesus, I think he is a spiritual priest that God sent at this moment. So look at verse 3. It says, he is without father and without mother, and without genealogy. All right? He has no human lineage. It says he doesn't have a mom, he doesn't have a dad. It says he doesn't have any genealogy. There's no lineage for him. It says having neither beginning of days nor end of life. Verse 3. He's eternal. He doesn't have beginning of days and he doesn't have end of life. But made like the Son of God, and remains a priest continually, or a priest forever. So these verses really shape why I say that Melchizedek was not an actual human person who is an actual king of an actual city. That he was a spiritual being that came in the form of a man, but clearly Abraham recognized him as something greater than just another king. How do I know that? Because Abraham tithed to him. Abraham gave him a tenth. It doesn't even say, was it a tenth of the goods that Abraham had gotten from the battle, or was it a tenth of everything that Abraham had? Likely it was a tenth of everything that he had. And so Abraham recognized that this was something greater, and he recognized that he was a spiritual being, spiritual come from God, and so he gave him a tenth of it. So again, it's either Christ come in the Old Testament, or it is at the very least, in my opinion, a spiritual priest, a heavenly priest that God sent. Because it says he's a priest forever, continually, the Hebrews said. And he was sent to meet Abram at that time. Anyhow, anything about that? And I still might say a couple more things, but I'm open to your questions or to your insights or to things you've been taught.
I wasn't meaning he was in the order of the Levitical priesthood, but just like that, it's from the Lord.
Right.
And the verse come to mind is Isaiah 9. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Yeah. Man.
Amen. Anything else? Someone else? Melchizedek. So he blesses Abraham when he comes out. He says, "Blessed be Abram," and he references God as the God Most High, as the one that's higher than any other God, higher than any other created thing, higher than anything else. He is the God Most High. He is the possessor of heaven and earth. it's kind of a going back almost to Genesis chapter 1. But he blesses Abraham. He says, and blessed be the God Most High. He's delivered your enemies into your hands. And so then Abram gave him a tithe. And again, it's just that Abram saw that he was a spiritual superior. And so he was supposed to give him everything that he, not supposed to, but it was just a response. It was a response to, and here's the deal. When we think of when we think of tithing, when we think of worship, just all of those serving, all of those kinds of things, we see them often as duties that we should do. But really they should just be a response to having been touched by the grace of God. They are just a response of a life that has experienced God's grace and been touched by God's grace. We just need to respond to Him. We need to respond to Him. It's not the duty. It's the response. It's the response. So anyhow, then in verse 21, it picks up. It says, now the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons and take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord, God Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth. I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap. I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, except only what the young men have eaten and the portion of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, and let them take their portion. So the king of Sodom comes back and he just says, let the people, give me the people back, but you just keep everything else. And Abram's like, I ain't keeping nothing. He says, I don't want anybody to say that you've made me rich or anything along those lines. I'm not keeping anything. He said, now the guys that went with me, they probably deserve to have a little something. He said, but I don't even want a sandal strap. I don't even want a piece of thread. I wonder if maybe Abram learned a little lesson back there in Egypt. I mean, he's obviously going to make the same sin again that he made. We're going to see that later on. But again, the point was made back there that, Pharaoh made him rich. Pharaoh was giving him all this stuff and made him rich. And so now maybe after years of reflection, Abram's like, I'm not taking that anymore because I'm going to trust the Lord to take care of me. And I'm going to trust the Lord to meet all my needs. So he didn't take anything from the king of Sodom. So that's really all I got. I guess I thought I'd spend more time talking about Melchizedek, but it was really pretty clear. But that's really all I got from chapter 14. So if anybody's got any questions about chapter 14.
I don't have a question, but about tithe.
Mm-hmm.
Always, when people say they're going to pay their tithes,
Mhm.
so they pay their light bill,
Mhm.
pay their gas bill, or
Mm-hmm.
something's cut off.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's an act of love.
The tithe is an act of love. Yeah, it is. It is. It is. And an act of faith. And an act of faith. And one of the things I want to point out is to make this point that the tithe isn't a law thing. There ain't even no law when Abram's giving the tithe. Moses ain't even alive yet. There ain't no 10 Commandments. There ain't no law. There ain't anything that says you have to tithe. It was just a response. It was an act of love or an act of response. Yes, sir, Mr. Allen.
I think you pretty well said it, but Abraham was about 500 years ahead of Moses.
That's right. That's right.
But I think Abraham knew more about Melchizedek than the scriptures tell us.
I think so too.
He recognized who he was.
I agree.
He gave to him.
I agree.
The Lord gave Abraham a great victory.
Mm-hmm.
He got his nephew back. He got all of his properties.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that was taken was returned to him.
Mm-hmm.
So Abraham was a lot deeper in faith and trust in God than what the scriptures tell us.
I agree. I agree. Yeah?
Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and I'll direct your paths. Well, when you lean on your understanding, well, you say, well, I won't be able to afford this, or I won't be able to afford that. I can't pay my tithe. That's leaning on your own understanding.
Right.
Instead of paying your tithe and let him take care of it.
Right. Amen. My video today was Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Although it wasn't about the tithe, necessarily. It was what? It was about faith and trust. Anybody else? Genesis chapter 14.
This, it kind of reminds, these two kings,
Mm-hmm.
kind of reminds you of when, or me, when Satan tempted Jesus about, what he would give him.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this is a little bit, Abraham was being tempted, maybe, kind of choosing between good and evil between these two kings. It just sort of reminds me of that.
When the king of Sodom was trying to give him all this stuff, yeah. And then you had Melchizedek, right.
Representing good
Right.
versus
That's true. That's true.
What confidence a man had would take 318 people and go against all these nations?
Yeah.
That don't make much good
Yeah.
sense.
Attack them from all sides and attack at night. That's all I know to say. But yeah, clearly Melchizedek said that God gave him the victory. Yeah.
And it says 318 trained.
Trained men.
So it was trained.
They were trained. He's got him a little nation going there, doesn't he? Anyone else? All righty.